Thank you very much, Beata. And hello, everyone. Thank you for making the time to be here today from wherever in the world you are at the moment. Again, thanks very much to the Human Rights Education Review for inviting me to speak today. So my aim for this webinar is to give you a more nuanced understanding of my research, which I base in Singapore through the case study of Tak Takut Kids Club, or TTKC. Just for some background, TTKC is a community organization for children aged between 7 and 14. It operates in a non-formal setting and serves many children and youths from disadvantaged backgrounds. So I'm looking forward to an engaging discussion with you in the Q&A later. I'll start with the premise of my research, which is that play is an enabling right. And my starting point was Article 31 of the UN's Convention on the Rights of the Child, which underscores a child's right to play. Article 31 reads, states parties recognize the right of the child to rest and leisure, to engage in play and recreational activities appropriate to the age of the child, and to participate freely in cultural life and the arts. States parties shall respect and promote the right of the child to participate fully in cultural and artistic life, and shall encourage the provision of appropriate and equal opportunities for cultural, artistic, recreational, and leisure activity. The underlines for emphasis are mine, and I'm highlighting how Article 31 provides for rights that are closely related to play. In fact, the indivisibility and interrelatedness of rights in the Convention or the CRC was emphasized by the Committee on the Rights of the Child in their general guidelines to states parties. And this indivisibility and interrelatedness of rights means that a child's right to play is indivisible and interrelated too. For example, Article 3, which states that decisions must be made in the child's best interests, or Articles 12, 13, and 14, which relate to a child's freedom of expression of opinions, views, and thoughts if the child is capable of doing so, or Article 15, which relates to a child's freedom of association and peaceful assembly. I should mention that my research was in relation generally to persons below the age of 18, which is the definition of a child according to Article 1 of the Convention. But back to Article 31. So how does Article 31, a child's right to play, exist in the Singapore context? To understand this, we need to look at how human rights are engaged with in Singapore. For clarity, I'm Singaporean born and bred. And this research project involving children was and is particularly important to me because of what I know to be systemic and possibly philosophical challenges to the notion of human rights in Singapore. Singapore takes a pragmatic stand on human rights. Human rights are subject, first of all, to the rule of law, and second, to cultural, social, economic, and historical contexts. To be clear, though, Singapore continues to confirm its commitment to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. But its leaders stress the need for nations to be allowed to develop their own forms of human rights according to their specific contexts. Singapore acceded to the CRC in 1995 with reservations and declarations that it continues to maintain. As mentioned, the implementation of Article 31 in Singapore is subject to the rule of law. It is also subject to the authority of parents, schools, and other persons who are entrusted with the care of a child. Now, Singapore has acceded to several other treaties with similar declarations and reservations. So just to go over some Article 31 rights again: play and rest, leisure, free participation in artistic, cultural, and recreational activities. And the literature shows that play is the only one of these rights not recognized in the International Covenant of Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, which Singapore has not acceded to. Cultural, social, economic, and historical contexts. One notable context is collective welfare over individual rights. So nation-building efforts since independence in 1965 have been to ingrain the narrative of survival. We are a small nation with people as our only resource. We are a trading and financial hub that is reliant on optimum productivity at all times. Another important context is meritocracy, which is essentially the belief that anyone can succeed if they just try hard enough. Some steps have been taken to temper this, a national mentorship program, for example, but meritocracy is still the prevailing measure of a person's worth. And education is a key driver of both nation-building efforts and meritocracy in Singapore, and it plays an important role in national identity formation and fostering economic competitiveness. And I'll come back to education in Singapore shortly. My research was guided by Paulo Freire's version of a dialogic reality and a critical consciousness that entails meaningful engagements and learning that enable us to discern the dramatic significance of change. Freire was concerned with learning that empowers us to make and remake, to create and recreate, and be more fully human, something that he underlines as the birthright of all. So with play as a subject of study, and with this Freirean principle in mind, my questions were, first, how might the child's right to play be effectively enabled in Singapore? And secondarily, what policies and practices of Tak Takut Kids Club, or TTKC, might inform state-led efforts to support the implementation of Article 31, the right to play in education? And what opportunities and challenges exist in guaranteeing the right to play in relation to education? To examine my questions, I used TTKC as a case study. Specifically, I analyzed documentary material in the public domain, as well as my observations. And my analysis was informed by my familiarity with TTKC. TTKC is a non-formal learning space and a third space in the sense that it is not a school, nor home, nor a tuition center. And I've been a volunteer and collaborator with TTKC since 2020. So I chose to study them because of their child-centered and play-focused ethos. But what is play? And play is not an easy subject of study. Many before me across disciplines who have studied play agree that it's slippery. I don't offer you a definition of play today, and I know I'm in good company because even play experts tend not to define it. Instead, they describe it. I've expanded on the literature that I discuss in my article, and some of the words used to describe play include paradox, ambiguous, elusive and subtle, messy and ubiquitous. And this is simply because play can be lots of things. It's mahjong with friends, it's Dungeons and Dragons, it's solitary daydreaming by the river, it's dancing on a float in a parade, it's cooking a meal for your stuffed toys. In general comment number 17, the committee described its understanding of play as any behavior, activity, or process initiated, controlled, and structured by children themselves that is non-compulsory, driven by intrinsic motivation, and undertaken for its own sake rather than as a means to an end. The key characteristics of play are fun, uncertainty, challenge, flexibility, and non-productivity. The committee reaffirms that it is a fundamental and vital dimension of the pleasure of childhood, as well as an essential component of physical, social, cognitive, emotional, and spiritual development. Again, there is no definition of play as such, only a very detailed description of play's characteristics. But there are key characteristics of play that everyone can agree on. Play is fun and joyful. Play is voluntary. Play requires you to show up to play. Play teaches you about the world around you. Play is as natural as breathing. When I started my research, I instinctively knew that it was necessary that I should strive for a deeper meaning of play. And as you can see, it is difficult, and it has been difficult for me to pin play down with a definition of what it is. However, it is much less difficult to understand what play is not. So play in its rawness as a state of being and doing is not play-based education. This distinction is important because there is a strong tendency to conflate the two. For children, play-based education is also sometimes referred to as pedagogical play or purposeful play. And if we think back to the key characteristics of play, it's voluntary, it's fun, it doesn't need outcomes, then play to order is no longer play. In Singapore, there is a framework for purposeful play, but only for preschoolers, which means that children 7 years old and up, for them, play fades out of the picture. So I come back to my earlier point about education being a key driver of nation-building efforts and meritocracy. We know play fades out of a child's life because the transmission of knowledge and learning in schools is still largely directed towards examination performance. Satisfactory performance translates to children and young persons having the skills and competence to be upstanding citizens and to meet the challenges of the world. There have been policy changes that now afford children some flexibility to adjust their curriculum load according to their strengths, interests, and needs. But the pressure to perform academically remains very real. Just one example why the pressure is real is how there continues to be a significant occupational wage gap linked to educational qualifications. As recently as its 6th periodic report that was published in 2024, Singapore reiterated the fundamental nature of meritocracy as a guiding principle. Meritocracy ensures that all Singaporeans can progress based on individual merit and without discrimination based on race, language, or religion. Moreover, paragraph 201 specifically references education as the leveler. I don't feel the need to go into the blind spots of meritocracy today because those have been argued well enough by people more expert than I. But let's consider this from the education perspective. Human rights, HRE, human rights education, is any learning, education, training, or information efforts aimed at building a universal culture of human rights. HRE is not an explicit part of the Singapore school curriculum. That said, human rights principles like non-discrimination, equality, inclusion, and participation can be found in certain primary, secondary, and pre-university subjects. For example, character and citizenship education, civics, history, and social studies. The teaching framework in Singapore can be likened to the values and awareness socialization approach to HRE, where 1, participation is involuntary, and 2, where the discussions are not aimed at encouraging action or activism. Incidentally, activism is very hard to do in Singapore because of the heavy use of legislation against activists. Social order is a priority, which is just shy of the concerns HRE wishes to address, concerns like the possibility of personal and societal change that give rise to action and transformation. So why do I even consider the possibility of play being recognized as a right in Singapore? This is because the state and parents are the primary duty bearers. And as experts have argued, the government will always be responsible and its obligations cannot be privatized. Moreover, Article 4 of the Convention states, states parties shall undertake all appropriate legislative, administrative, and other measures for the implementation of the rights recognized in the present convention. So I'll now take you through some of the findings of my research with TTKC that support the possibility of giving play more primacy in our lives. Play as content and process. What this means is that play is the what and the how. Play is the ethos of TTKC through the medium of participatory art. And play is the thing that children and adults are invited to do when they enter the TTKC space, to build trust and relationships and to engage with others. Play is also how children build trust and relationships and engage with others. There are lots of activities that children can choose from: art, gardening, cooking, but what is quite special about TTKC is the free play that is encouraged around those activities. Now, the kids at TTKC aren't explicitly learning that they have a right to play, but they exercise that right anytime they do play. Moreover, when they play, they exercise other interrelated rights like freedom of expression, dignity, agency, and free participation in the arts and culture. Dialogue and experiences of change. TTKC takes a dialogic approach to its engagements with children. It starts with meeting children where they are, understanding their needs and wants, and co-creating with them. These critical engagements happen with the adults too. Adults who might be staff, volunteers, or even people from the neighborhood who pop in every once in a while just to see what's going on. I'll quickly share an excerpt from a documented interview with one of the facilitators, and I'll read this in my best English accent for those who aren't familiar with it. Wow, when I first came, I didn't know what the hell I was doing. I still don't know. I think my journey has evolved from something very product-driven to process-driven. Because this space is so spontaneous, to come in with a fixed role is so difficult. I just try to blend in conversations. If I don't see that conversation going anywhere, I leave it. Like, my role here is not to be an artist, but to be a creative companion with the children. This is an example of personal growth. And this growth is change that has an impact on behaviors. Changed behaviors multiplied by whatever number leads to even more changes in more people, which eventually, by the power of the ripple effect, results in wider societal change. And at the heart of that change is play. I will admit that doing my research from the perspective of human rights in Singapore had me pondering on many occasions the impossibility of ever seeing play entrenched as a right for anyone, let alone children. I spoke earlier about the pragmatic approach that Singapore takes with governance. In addition to the loss of play in children's lives, another consequence of that pragmatic approach is that infringements or violence or transgressions are viewed as criminal acts and not matters that warrant a discussion of rights. But I remain hopeful, for good reason too. This is The Good Gang, a book that I co-wrote with the founder and director of TTKC, Lin Shiyun, and Mark Nair. It was launched in Singapore last November and has caught the attention of many, even at the ministry level. In fact, it was the current Minister of Education, Desmond Lee, who wrote the foreword to The Good Gang, which means there remains the possibility of education policy evolving to be more child-centric and more free play focused. State action and support is absolutely required. But it also and always remains possible for parents and guardians to consciously and mindfully ensure that their children have more time to play. So what's next for me? Well, I'm currently exploring play as it relates to adults. If we feel that our children aren't playing enough, adults definitely are not, and much to the detriment of society at large too. So these are my references. If you'd like to take a screenshot, please go ahead. And thank you very much for listening. I look forward to your comments and questions.